So tell us when it's going. Yazin, come to this side, please. Who's that? Okay.
I'm assuming it's going.
Yes, no.
First, second block. Message. First block. Message. First block.
You're being recorded.
I consent.
Categories. Delete.
Oh, I thought it was going to say something else. Okay, good. You consent. Perfect. Okay. So, I am joined today by John Harrison, and I'm just going to ask, can you please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your role within our school? We work together in an elementary school in London, Ontario. So I'm just going to get him to tell us a little bit about his role.
So, John Harrison, I'm the learning support teacher, one of 3 at the school here. I primarily support the DE Center as well as the FTK department. We focus on primarily the high need students in FTK, as well as any of the kids that require emotional regulation or have developmental delays. And in conjunction, the DE Center, we focus on the students that have higher needs that aren't able to achieve the curriculum standard in the mainstream school setting.
Perfect. And can you explain what kind of assessments and specialty roles you perform that differ from my regular classroom roles?
So there are 2 primary assessments that an LST typically does provide for throughout the year. One of them is a WIAT, which is where you would be testing the students' cognitive abilities. So it's a little bit different than psychoeducational testing. It's primarily focusing on literacy, numeracy. There is different components about reading. There's other parts with phonetics, the sounding of words, and as well as actual fake words that are made up. So it's to test their ability to decode. And then, like I said, there's the reading aspect, and then there's also a mathematical aspect. There's also the CCAT test, which is focusing on testing, which primarily sees about students for giftedness. And that's done every year, regardless of the student's ability. Parents are able to consent or withdraw their students from that testing, and that's done every year. It's board mandated. The testing is done in 3 different batteries. So there's a verbal text, which is for literacy, and there's a nonverbal, which is usually done through images, spatial awareness, things like that, and then there's the mathematical component.
Perfect, thank you. And can you talk about any specialty training that you've received in order to perform these assessments on our different students?
Yep, so both of these for the CCAT and the WIAT, I received PD training, so professional development. So that was separate away from school. That was actually in I guess a larger group setting where both of the WIAT and the CCAT took about 2 to 3 sessions. They were full days to be trained on one, how to implement it, and then also how to understand the data, because with the WIAT you will take the information and you have to actually go through and score the test yourself and write up a report. While with CCAT, it is done through standardized testing with the response bubbles, and so that's submitted back to Pearson, and they actually scan it through a computer and the results are sent back to us.
Interesting. And can you tell me how a student comes into your realm, your sphere, the role you play in the identification process? So starting with the classroom teacher, how does a classroom teacher come to you? What do they say? And what does that look like moving forward for you?
So typically for me, I do focus mostly on new registrants for FTK that have high needs that parents have flagged on the registration. But if there was a student that was already in school that required assistance and that was being acknowledged by the classroom teacher, first they would have to do a PDT referral. So that's a program developmental team referral. So that would be where they would talk about strategies that they've used. So tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 interventions. And then it would be talking about what the concerns are, how you've addressed them, what the implementation was, and then based on the information that's filled out in the form, then we would have a PDT meeting. And that would be where we would collect the team together, typically the principal, as well as any other supports like the SLP, the speech and language pathologist. And then that's where we would talk about the strategies and interventions that we've trialed, how they are successful, and then we would brainstorm and come up with new ways to support the student. If those are unsuccessful after a period of time, which is typically 60 weeks, then we would go back and reassess, and that's where we could talk about further testing to figure out if there are higher needs. Typically, something like that doesn't happen until grade 3 with the psychoeducational testing done by a psychological associate. Then we would get the report back, and that's where an identification could potentially come from. So that would be for MID, a mild intellectual disability. Speech impairment could come from an SLP. The diagnosis of autism can only come from a family doctor, and that's where our psychological associate would take the report from the doctor, and then they would confirm the findings, and then we could identify the student.
Perfect, thank you. And what kind of benefits do our students receive from assessments or meetings that you lead?
So some of the typical things that are the assessment that can be beneficial. So, and most psychological associates, when they do reviews of any of the documents for a teacher, they will take the report from the doctor, go through it, and if a student does have ASD, then typically they all will recommend technology, so specifically an iPad to support the student accessing the curriculum. So tech is one of the biggest things that any of the assessments are. And in fact, this year they've changed it so that you can get technology now through a wide assessment, where before you could only get it done through a psychological associate testing. So primarily tech, but then it also can get them any additional tests or support such as ABA referrals. There would be IBI or even TOSA, teacher on special assignment, where they could come in and coach and model for the classroom teacher to support the student.
That's awesome. And then what are, on the opposite side of it, what are some issues, misconceptions, or roadblocks that come from the meetings that you lead?
So one of the biggest misconceptions is that the meeting will fix everything. It does not. The meeting is usually the starting point, but unfortunately, it's not the first part where that'll happen. So typically, what should be happening first is the teacher should be having a conversation with the parent first. Then they would have multiple conversations with them so that the parent is aware of the issue, because a lot of times the meeting will be the first time where the parent will hear about something and they're sort of blindsided. So the teacher needs to implement these strategies to be supporting the student first before a meeting can happen. Then they expect the meeting to be, oh, we're had it and now everything's done. But typically what comes out of the meeting is, here are new strategies, and the classroom teacher, again, is on them to help support. So typically it's believed that the PDTs will fix everything, where it's just a stepping stone to get more support for that.
Interesting. And then I just wanted to talk about the involvement of the people on the team who come into the PDTs. So first, starting with parents, what is the involvement of parents and their role in the assessments or the meetings that you lead?
So specifically for the PDTs, I typically like to have the parents talk first, because I like to hear how they view their child and what information they can provide from their home aspect. So we do understand that obviously home and school are two different environments, and that a child will act differently. We always get a lot of, oh, I never see these behaviors at home. But that's also because there's not typically 27 kids at home with other the same age peers. So the parent will provide usually likes, their strengths, their needs, or just any of their interactions at home. And then the next part would be where the classroom teacher would then either corroborate, confirm, or add to on top of the information the parent shared. It's also really good to know how the child is at home and what strategies the parent uses, because 9 times out of 10, all the strategies are being done at school and nothing's being done at home. So we have an imbalance, and we need to be more successful by working together. So the benefit of that is a PDT meeting usually gets everybody on board. That's why it's called a professional or the developmental team meeting, because we're all a team. We don't see the parents as something separate from the school. We're all working together for the child.
Right, and that's something that we've really learned about in our course, is just the approach of having the whole team and a multidisciplinary team at that. And that's something that we found in my classroom, is it's not just me. I work very closely with 2 educational assistants, with John. I work very closely with a nurse, and then I have a speech and language pathologist, an occupational therapist, a physical therapist. So there's all of us involved in the team aspect. Can you also just touch on the role of other members of the PDT team members? So what happens after you complete an assessment or you do a PDT, and then that goes on to SLP, or who else is involved with you?
So usually after the PDT, there's the part where is the next steps, and that would be at the end of the meeting, where I summarize what we've achieved out of the meeting and what we plan on doing going forward. Sometimes what comes out of that is a CMS referral, so that would be where we would take documentation and get authorization for the SLP to provide support to the student. Another one would be the OT or PT referral. They typically can't participate in the meetings until a referral is done. So the student has to be active on the caseload. So you typically don't start in the meeting, and that's why it's beneficial to take really good notes and ask the specific questions. So having a good agenda is really important. The other people that are involved are the psychological associate. They have to be involved to get consent for testing, typically, anything psychoeducational. They also participate in sharing the results of the tests. Then there would also potentially be nursing because there are other aspects in schools. So we do have nursing needs at our school. So that would be nursing, and then also the subcontracted company that would be providing the nursing. So we have to talk about what the needs. So typically feedings, G tubes. There's also we have children that aspirate. So we have suction machines. There'd be a variety of different aspects. So basically, each student, depending on their needs, that would be the person that would be invited to the meeting. Yeah.
The other teams. Interesting.
So meetings are very specific to each student. You can't really do a generic meeting for any child.
Right. And then, so basically things start with teacher and yourself, the two of you work together, and then we progress to the PDT, and then it progresses out from there.
Yeah. So we try to start with the tier 1, tier 2 interventions because they typically are involved in the classroom and the teacher. They're easier to access, and also those interventions usually benefit the whole class. So that's why there's certain things that it might work for one child, might not put it for all of them, and other people can benefit from it, like a visual schedule. And then that's when, if those things aren't working, you go up the ladder to tier 2, and then that would be the tier 3, which would be the additional supports and other staff.
Well, thank you so much for your time and giving me all this information and allowing me to share it with my peers. I really appreciate it.
Not a problem. Thanks for letting me talk. There's a stop button. Weird. Okay.
Well, I'll cut it. Oh, there we go. It's still recording.
Yeah, you can turn the mic off or just leave, right?